Okay, so as we said that the next few days we'll be learning about Chanukah al pi Chassidus, and then we'll go back to starting a new mimer. So Chanukah itself, we all know the story behind it. What we're going to go into more is how Chassidus explains what is Chanukah all about. So first of all, a general introduction, and this is something which we spoke about when it came to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Torah. Yeah, there are copies over there.
Yeah.
You know, it might be a good idea to put on that table so everyone, whoever comes, can pick one up. So the general Haggadah is, and this is a general thing in Chassidus regarding all Yom Tovim, that there's a huge difference between the way we see a Yontif when you study Torah in general, and the way we see a Yontif when we study Torah from the inner dimension of Torah, which is Chassidus. And that is based on the words of the Arizal. And he explains the pasuk in Megillas Esther. In the Megillas Esther, there's a verse that says, "Hayomim ho'elu niskarim v'nasim," which means that these days, meaning the days of Purim, niskarim will be commemorated, v'nasim, and they will be done. These are the literal. This would be the literal translation of the words. And the Gemara says that being that it says niskarim, which means it'll be remembered, and nasim, it'll be done, it's alluding to two things which we have to do on Purim. One is verbal and one is action. Verbal is reading the Megillah, and done is alluding to the action, which is sending the food packages, the shalach manas, and giving tzedakah, eating a meal, and so on. The Arizal says there's something deeper here in these words. Niskarim v'nasim means that if we commemorate Purim properly, v'nasim, then it's done, meaning to say, whatever occurred originally, the first time, over 2,000 years ago, on the day of Purim, v'nasim, it happens again, it reoccurs again every single year, and that's accomplished through us remembering and commemorating the Yontif properly. And what does that mean? Of course, Purim only happened once, so it means, especially consistent with what we just finished learning in the previous mimer, is that everything that happens down here is connected to something that happens up there. And therefore, when there was a story with Haman, and he was threatening to destroy the entire Jewish nation, Achashverosh, the king of Persia, everything that was going on down here originated up there. There's a heavenly court, and there's things going on in the heavenly court, and there are reasons why they decided that this is something that needs to be done. And the same is with the victory and the miracle. That the fact that there was a miracle is because something miraculous happened up there, and whatever happened up there, which is miraculous, manifested down here, and we saw a miracle down here on earth. And this is the principle that applies to every single Yontif, whether it's Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, and Chanukah, Purim, it's all the same. That when we saw miracles down here, it's because there was something outstanding going on up there in the spiritual realm, and that manifested down here in a miracle. So this explains why we see that throughout history, whenever there was sort of a crisis and Hashem told whoever was the leader of the generation at the time what to do, we find different things were done. For example, in Mitzrayim, when it came to Mitzrayim, Hashem sent 10 plagues on Egypt. You don't find this ever again in history with any other nation that was our enemy. When it comes to Amalek, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu went up on a mountain and he lifted his hands like this. And as long as his hands were high up, they were winning the war. When he put his hands down, they were losing the war. And therefore, he had two people supporting his both hands, and they won the war. We don't find this ever again anyplace else. When it comes to Purim, we find that what did Mordechai do? He gathered 22,000 children and said the children should study Torah, and that's what canceled the decree. We don't find this anywhere else. When the Jews had to come into Eretz Yisrael and conquer Yericho, Yeshua had them circle the city 7 times. They blew the shofar and did other things, and the walls collapsed. You don't find this other places. So the reason is because it's not just a physical war. Whatever was going on a spiritual level. And what was going on down here was only a reflection and manifestation of something going on higher. So therefore, depending on what's going on in the spiritual plane, that's why the things we needed to do was different one from the other. So as a general introduction, before we get into the details, whenever we find in the Chumash that there was a nation that oppressed us, like Egypt, or we find the nation of Midian, then we find Plishtim, here in the case of Amalek, and then you have, in our case, the Yevanim. The way Chassidus explains it is that there was, it means that there's a force that's opposing Yidden, opposing Torah, opposing mitzvahs, and that force is a klipa. And each klipa is different, one from the other. The klipa is embodied in that nation. In other words, yes, the Egyptians were human beings like we are human beings. And they were human beings that had their agendas, and they were wanted us as slaves, and they were thinking of the different benefits. That's down here. But in essence, they embodied a force of klipa. And the klipa was the force and the driving force. Its agenda was to eliminate Kedusha, to fight Kedusha, not allow Kedusha to be shining in this world. And therefore, these human beings that were Mitzrayim, they embodied this klipa. And when the Jews went out of Egypt, that means we defeated that klipa. And the same is with Yevanim in the times of Chanukah, and Amalek in the times of Purim, and the same with all stories in Tanakh with different nations. The nations embodied a certain klipa. And in Chassidus, it talks about which klipa it is. And that's why the method that was used was different. Think of it begashmius, that there are different kinds of diseases, unfortunately, different kinds of illnesses, and therefore there are different kinds of treatment. You don't just say, oh, somebody's sick, so you give antibiotic. Not always is an antibiotic. And even if it is, not always is it the same antibiotic. And sometimes it's this treatment, sometimes it's different treatment, depending on what the issue is. So because spiritually it's a different kind of a klipa, therefore the method that was used to defeat the klipa was also different. So we understand two things from this. One is that the nation that opposed us was an embodiment of a certain klipa. And when we say that every year, when this day comes around, the first original event sort of reoccurs, means that every year we're given the power to defeat that klipa. In other words, let's say we'll soon talk about Chanukah, that the Yevanim, this nation, the Greeks that oppressed us in the times of Chanukah, they embodied a certain klipa. They were defeated. But the klipa, that germ, so to speak, that spiritual germ still exists. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore in the form of this huge nation, but it exists in each one of us on a smaller scale. And therefore, when it comes to Chanukah, spiritually, we have the power on that day to draw energy from Hashem, to be able to defeat that particular klipa within us. To make it simpler, it's like we say in simple words, that there are different kinds of Yetzer Haras. It's really the same thing, it's just in a simpler language. Some people have a Yetzer Hara for money. Some people have a Yetzer Hara for power. Some people have a Yetzer Hara to control other people's lives. And some people have a Yetzer Hara for different other pleasures in life. There are different Yetzer Haras. Not everybody has every single kind of Yetzer Hara. the reason for this is because it's a different klipa, it's a different spiritual klipa, and therefore it leads a person into a different direction. So two things happen every year on Chanukah, every year on Purim, and every year on Pesach, and so on. And of course, here we're going to focus on Chanukah. The two things are, number one, being that there was a miracle, then a miracle means godliness was revealed through the miracles of Chanukah. There were many miracles. The fact that godliness was revealed means that spiritually, Hashem's light was revealed in an unprecedented way. And as a result of that, there was a miracle that the oil lasted for 8 days. And there was a miracle that a small group of people were able to defeat this huge army, and many other miracles that happened. So the physical event only happened once, but the spiritual revelation of godliness that took place over 2,000 years ago in the times of Chanukah, every single year on the 25th day of Chanukah, for the next 8 days, that light that was shining then, that unusual light, shines again for 8 days. The only problem is that we don't see it, we don't feel it, there's no manifestation here in the physical realm, but spiritually, it's repeating itself. And in the spiritual realm, there's a huge, an amazing gili alakus, godly revelation that we don't have any other day of the year. That's Chanukah, and that's Purim, and that's Pesach, and that's every Yom Tov. And every Yom Tov, it's a different kind of revelation. So that's number one. That when Chanukah comes around, when you look at Chanukah from the general point of view, not Chassidus, we're celebrating and commemorating something that happened once upon a time, many, many moons ago. When you look at Chanukah from Chassidus perspective, we're celebrating something that happened then, and it's happening now. Right now, there's a light of Hashem that's shining, and we want to make every effort that we can to be able to absorb that light and internalize it, and that light will give us strength, will empower us in a certain way spiritually. That's number one. Number two, just like then, that light was the light that helped us defeat Yevonim, so too now there's a klipa in each one of us that is that kind of sort of germ, that kind of klipa, Yevonim, and this light helps us defeat that klipa. So therefore, we focus on these things. What is it all about and what's happening spiritually? Just to bring out this point, I want to show you something very interesting. What I just finished saying to you is officially something like Chassidus, Kabbalah, but here's a Rashi and Chumash. If you only pay attention to what Rashi says, you see pretty clearly these words. This is Chumash Dvarim, one sheet, don't take everything. Chumash Dvarim, chapter 2, Pasuk 31, and it says these words, Vayemer Hashem Elai, and Hashem said to Moshe, Re'eh, look, Hachilosi teis lefanecha, I began to deliver to you Sichon. Sichon was like one of the superpowers of that generation. I delivered this enemy in your hands and his land that you should be able to inherit it. What does it mean? You see that I've already began to deliver him in your hands. Look what Rashi says. Hashem took the angel that's in charge of that nation, Amorim, and up there in heaven, he took that angel, put them under Moshe Rabbeinu's feet, and Moshe Rabbeinu stamped on his throat, and basically by conquering him up there, Hashem said, you know that you've got him conquered down here. Pretty much what it says in Chassidus is a simple Rashi and Chumash, that what's really happening is up there, and from there we see the results down here. So we want to learn about what's going on up there, and then how do we apply it down here. So what I'd like to do, especially that this week we're not going to have classes on Friday because of Chanukah, and next week we're not going to have classes on Friday because of the Shabbaton. So we're not going to have the Gemara class. So I want to start with the first pages in the booklet, which is the Gemara on the subject of Chanukah. And I underline different parts. These are all the parts that we have the Hasidic insight into those words. And just a little introduction, it's interesting that for every yontif, there's actually a separate tractate in Gemara. There's a tractate called Shabbos, which has all the laws of Shabbos. There's a tractate called Yuma, which is all the laws of Yom Kippur. There's a tractate called Rosh Hashanah, all the laws of Rosh Hashanah. There's a tractate called Psachim, all the laws of Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. There's a tractate called Megillah, all the laws of Purim. And there's no tractate that is designated exclusively for Chanukah. But nevertheless, in the tractate of Shabbos, there's a portion that's where the subject of Chanukah and the laws of Chanukah are found there in a more concentrated way. Why specifically Shabbos? The general answer that's given is the relationship between Shabbos and Chanukah. These are two mitzvahs that have to do with lighting candles. Shabbos is lighting candles and Chanukah is lighting candles. So this is the Gemara. I will read just a few parts, and then we'll go back to each of these parts and explain what Chassidus adds insight into these parts of the Gemara. So this is a copy of the Art School Gemara. We're on page. We'll start with where it says here, page 4. In the Brisa, it says, when you light the menorah on Chanukah, how late can you light it? We know we're supposed to light it at night, but how late can you light it? 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So the first paragraph, the Gemara clarifies a statement in the Brisa, Ad shetichla regel min hashuk. The Brisa taught that the time for lighting the menorah is until the passers-by have vanished from the market. That is, as long as there are people walking around outside, it's still a mitzvah to light the menorah. Once there are no longer any people walking outside, there's no longer a mitzvah. And how long is that? When is that? Omer Rabbi Bar Chama, Omer Rabbi Yechanan, Adekalya Rigla Tarmadoi. There was a certain tribe, they were called Tarmadoyans. And they would be the night owls. They'd be there the latest. So, you know, like every place in the dorm, you have those people that they're up the latest. So you have the tribe that they hung around the latest. And the Gemara says they used to collect wood for fire. So the Gemara says, once you don't see them, you know, you're not going to see anybody else already because they're the latest. And I underlined it because there's a beautiful explanation in Chassidus, a deeper meaning to those words. Let's go to the next paragraph. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught in a Brisa, mitzvahs Chanukah ner isha beise. The original mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles is every person should light for himself and his household, which means a candle for every member of the family. Mahadrin, and those who pursue, a candle for the whole family. For those who want to do mahadrim, which means they want to observe the mitzvah in a more enhanced way, they light a light for each and every one in the family, which means every night they can light one candle for every family member. Then there's mahadrin, mina mahadrin, those that want to be even more out of their way in doing the mitzvah in a more enhanced way. They light differently. What's different? There are two opinions, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai say the first day of Chanukah one lights 8 lights, and from that point on, you go down. So it means the second night 7, the third night 6, and the last night of Chanukah you light one candle. Beis Hillel says you light one candle the first night, and then every night you add. Just to show you an interesting thing, that the word Chanukah is spelled Ches, Nun, Vav, Chav, Hey. So when we light candles, we light it according to Beis Shammai's opinion or Beis Hillel's opinion? Hillel. So the word Chanukah stands for Ches, Neros, 8 candles, the halacha, and the halacha is Kebeis Hillel. So it's hinted in the words.
Oh my God. Anybody see that coming? No.
Okay.
Say that one more time.
Ches means 8. Nun stands for Nero, candles, 8 candles. the halacha, and the halacha is kebeis Hillel, like a school of Hillel. Beis means the school. There were two people. One was called Hillel, and one was called Shammai. But they established yeshivas, and their students had yeshivas. So down the line, there were two schools of thought. One was the school of Shammai, one was the school of Hillel. So if you see the word Hillel, it's the person. If it says Beis Hillel, it's the school of Hillel.
Is the vav
The halacha. And the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So everyone agrees that you light 8 candles, but the question is in what order? Now, what's the difference of opinion? Omar Ula said, Pligiba trei amaroi b'marova. There are 2 Amoraim in the West, means in Israel. They disagree about the reason for this. Who are the 2 sages? Rabbi Yosi bar Ovin, Rabbi Yosi bar Zvida. Chadama, one of them says, time of the Rabbi Hillel, the reason for the Beis Shammai's reason why he says to light down is Keneged Yomim HaNechnosim. Because when you light the candles, you light the candle corresponding to the days, the number of days that are yet to come. So the first night, there are 8 days left. So you light 8 candles. The second night, there's only 7 days more to come. So you light 7 candles. And then the last day is only 1 day, so you light 1 candle. Hillel says, let's turn the page. Keneged Yomim HaYotzim. Then we light the candles, we light for the days that have already passed. So the first night, we're lighting for 1 day. We only had 1 day. The second night, we already have 2 days. And therefore, we light it differently. That's one explanation. Chadamar, the other sage, says, he explains their dispute differently. Time of the Beis Shammai, Beis Shammai's reason is Keneged Porei HaChag. It corresponds to the bulls of the Sukkot festival. On Sukkot, there was the time of the year that they used to bring 70 sacrifices. And actually the 70 sacrifices correspond to the 70 nations. And that's why the Gemara says that if the nations of the world would have known how much bracha they get from the Beis HaMikdash, especially from these 70 sacrifices, not only they wouldn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash, they would surround it with legions of soldiers and protect the Beis HaMikdash. But the order of the 70 bulls was the following. The first day of Sukkot, they brought 13 bulls. The second day, 12. The third day, 11. The fourth day, 10. Went down. And being that Sukkot is 8 days, other holidays are 7. Sukkot is 8, and Chanukah is 8. So he draws a parallel between these 8 days and those days. Just like over there, you're going down, here too, we go down. That's Beis Shammai. The time of the Beis Hillel, what's Beis Hillel's reason? The Mailim B'Kodesh B'Maridin. He says there's a principle that whenever it comes to matters of holiness, you always go up, you don't go down. And therefore, we don't go down 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, we have to go up. So the first night is 1, and you walk up and go over there. Rabbi Baruch Rabbi Yechanan. So this sage, Rabbi Baruch Chana, said, Shnei Zkenim Hoyu B'Tzidon. In the city of Sidon, there were 2 elderly people. One of them did things like Beis Shammai, he was from that school. The other one was from the school of Beis Hillel. And they both gave reasons. Keneged Porei HaChag. And that elderly person said his reason is because it's corresponding the 8 days of Sukkot where they brought the Karbanis and they went down in their numbers. And the one who went up, he gave the second reason. In other words, he's supporting the second opinion. Now we'll go to the second column on this page. Tan Rabbanan, the sages, our rabbis have taught. Ne'er mitzvah lanicha pesach beisim b'chutz. The original mitzvah of Chanukah is to light it. All these things that are underlined means we'll go back to it, and we're going to explain what Chassidus offers insight into those words. You're supposed to light it by the doorway on the outside, which means you're supposed to take the door away in the house, which is the furthest to the street, closest to the street, and that's where you have to light the menorah. Im hayidar bali. What if he lived on an upper floor, on a second floor, and he can't do that? Manicha b'chalayin hasamuch l'shus rab. Then he should put it by the window, which faces the street. B'shas hasakana, when it's a time of danger, when the time of Golus, where Jews couldn't put the menorah there, that would just provoke the non-Jews and it would be a danger. In that case, manicha al shulchanai, he could put it on his table, the daya, and that's enough. Let's turn the page now. Page 6. On top it says 21b4. My Chanukah, the first paragraph. What is the reason for Chanukah? And as commentators explain, we're not asking, everybody knows what Chanukah is, but he's asking what was the main reason why they established it as a festival. Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught, B'chavhei b'Kislev, Yom the Chanukah T'manya Inu. Starting from the 25th of Kislev, the days of Chanukah are 8. And this is a yontif. Le mispid b'hain, you're not allowed to eulogize during those days. You're not allowed to fast during those days. It's a holiday. And what happened? Nichnasu Yavanim lehechol. The Syrian Greeks went into the sanctuary. Kimu kol hashmanim shebehechol. They contaminated all the bottles of oil that were there, and everything became impure. When the royal family of Chashmonaim, headed by Yehuda HaMaccabee, when they defeated them, they wanted to light the menorah. They searched and they couldn't find any oil. And they found only one pach echad shel shemen, a small flask of oil. And how did they know that it wasn't contaminated? It had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and the seal wasn't broken. And being that it wasn't broken, they knew that it wasn't touched and it's pure. Some say that they found it under the boards of the floor. Apparently it rolled under, and that's how it was protected. And it had only enough oil for one day. Nasa Beines, there was a miracle. And this one little bit of oil lasted for 8 days. And as it's explained, that in those days they would take oil from a certain city. It took 4 days to get there and to come back. So they needed 8 days to get a new supply of oil. So Hashem made a miracle that the oil lasted for 8 days. Yeah.
What made the other oil contaminated?
The mere fact that they touched it, that the Greeks touched it, makes it contaminated, that it's not allowed to be used for the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, it's not contaminated in a way that it can't be used for household purposes, but the Beis HaMikdash, it can be used.
So people can use it for cooking?
These things, yeah. L'shana acheres, the following year, which means the first year that they were celebrating, Kovim, the sages of that generation, designated this day as Yom Tovim, the 8 days as the Yontiv, B'halal v'hidah, to thank and praise Hashem for the miracles that he performed. Just want to draw your attention to an interesting thing. If you look at the footnotes, footnote 43, it says that the Beis Yosef is Rabbi Yosef Kaira, the one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He asked the question, and this is probably one of the most famous questions regarding Chanukah. And his question is, if there was enough oil for 1 day, and it lasted for 8 days, really the miracle was a 7-day miracle, not an 8-day miracle. And he gives a few answers. Different people throughout the ages gave answers. And someone in our generation, maybe 20, 30 years ago, published a book, and he used a quote from Gemara, a candle for 100. The Gemara is a phrase, I'm not sure where the source is. The phrase is that the same candle that gives light to one person gives light to 100 people. Ner la'echad, ner la'meya. So he named his book Ner la'meya. What is it? He collected 100 answers to this question. So there's a sikh from the Rebbe about this question also. But generally speaking, one of the answers are that they took the oil. I'm just giving one answer. They took the oil and they divided it into 8 parts. So really, even the first day didn't have enough for one day, only for an eighth of a day, and it lasted a whole day. Another answer is that they put in all the oil the first day, but it only got a little bit smaller. It wasn't consumed by the fire, and that's how they explain the miracles. So this is the Gemara, and now let's go into explaining what is Chanukah from Upper Chassidus. So in this book that I gave you, page 1 and 2, we're going to do the same thing which we did during Tishrei, and that is, these are all terms, quotes, phrases, either from Gemara or Halacha, Midrashim, that have Chassidic insight into them, and we'll soon see. And by going through this, we sort of will cover, at least in a general way, the various subjects that Chassidus talks about when it comes to Chanukah. So, first, let me start with a few questions, and then we'll go into the explanation. We know that when the Romans attacked the Yidden, what did they do? They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. They knew the Beis Hamikdash, this is our strength, and they destroyed it. Before that, when the Babylonians attacked the base, when they attacked us, they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. In the times before there was a Beis Hamikdash, there were other enemies that destroyed the Mishkan. Before they had a Beis Hamikdash, they also destroyed it in a place called Shiloh. Here we find a strange thing. They defeated us initially. They took over the land, they took over the country, these Greeks, but they didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash. What did they do? They made everything impure. How come they didn't do the same thing that everybody else did, which is just to destroy the Beis Hamikdash? They allowed it to stand, but they made all the oil impure. They made Mizbeach impure. They made everything in the Beis Hamikdash impure. That's one question. The second question, which is also a very famous question, is there was a big miracle here. Yehuda Maccabee and his people that were fighting them were literally a handful of people. There's a Rashi in Chumash. Rashi says there were 12 people altogether. And these were not trained soldiers. These were these were people that were Jews who were sitting and learning Torah. Kohanim, they were doing the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. They weren't trained to be in the military. And they were fighting the Greeks, who at that time was a superpower in the world, and a trained army, tens of thousands of soldiers, and they were able to defeat them. That's an amazing miracle. So we don't make such a big fuss about that miracle. In fact, we don't even have a custom to do something to represent that miracle. What we do have is a custom to light the menorah, not a custom, a mitzvah, to light the menorah to represent the miracle with the oil. Why is that? There's another question that's brought up, and that is that why is it that there's no mitzvah to eat a meal? We have parties, we eat latkes, we absorb a lot of oil during these 8 days, but there's no mitzvah like there is with Purim. Every single Yantav except Yom Kippur, there's a mitzvah to eat, to wash and eat a meal. And Chanukah is the only Yantav, there's no mitzvah to eat a meal. And usually, even though it's a yontif that was established by the sages, but when they establish a yontif, they always made it similar to the way it is in the Torah holidays. So Pesach you eat meals, and Shavuos you eat meals, and Sukkot you eat meals, Rosh Hashanah even you eat meals, and even Yom Kippur, the day before you eat meal. And when it comes to Chanukah, there's no obligation to eat a meal. Also, where do you light the menorah? You light it on the left side. On the right side, you have the mezuzah. On the left side, you put the menorah. It's also a question that in Torah, in general, the right always has precedence. And usually you look to do things on the right. And over here, it's dafka, the left side. Then there's a question about the timing. Now, when it comes to the menorah, this menorah is to commemorate the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash was actually supposed to be lit before nightfall. It was lit mincha time, and dafka before it became dark. And this menorah, which is to commemorate that, is dafka after nightfall. Also, the question about the numbers. The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash had 7 branches and 7 candles, and this menorah has 8 candles. It says that the miracle was that they found a jug of oil. And how did they know that it was kosher? Hashem made a miracle. They found the jug of oil. They had a seal of the Kohen Gadol. It is not such a difficult question, but it's still something to notice. And that is, how come Hashem made that this jug of oil should have the seal of the Kohen Gadol? Any Kohen. The Kohen Gadol is not the only one who put a seal on the oil. In fact, probably most of the seals were put there by an ordinary Kohen. Just a seal to make sure that you know this wasn't touched. So why is it done in such a way? Yeah.
Sorry, this is silly, but why?
It's not silly, but
If
anyway.
you're not gonna eat the oil, why does it need to be kosher? The candles.
The Beis Hamikdash?
Yeah, like just lighting.
No,
candles in
it's-
general. If we don't
No,
have
not
kosher
the, it's we're talking about the Beis Hamikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, because it's so holy, a person who is impure, a person who had contact with a dead body, or any other kind of impurity, wasn't even allowed to walk into the Beis Hamikdash. And if there's any object that's not pure, tamei, according halachically tamei, then it's not allowed to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, if this was touched by them, that makes it impure regarding the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question or two. So to make it impure, they literally have to touch the oil itself, because if they're touching the jug, the seal would still be on it.
I think it's moving the oil, moving it around, I guess. Not
But the seal would still be on it. They picked up the jug and moved it.
no, if it's sealed, it doesn't affect it.
Okay.
Like wine also. If wine is in a bottle that's sealed,
Okay.
it doesn't affect the
Also,
wine.
would it be? It didn't just have to be the Greeks. Would it be any non-Jew
Yeah,
that touches the oil?
yeah.
Got it. And or a Jew that's impure. If
Yeah.
they touch the oil?
Yes, same thing.
Which would that be kind of honor code, or would you know if somebody's impure? You see what I'm saying? Like, what if a Jew or
Yeah.
accidentally came in impure and touched the oil?
If we don't know, we don't know. In fact, that's one of the things about purity and impurity, that you can't see anything with your eyes. You don't see a difference. It's not that if you touch it, if you touch the oil with impure hands, suddenly it turns blue. So we'd have to know, the person would have to be honest and say, I just realized I did something wrong, and then we can use that oil. Even this fact that halachically, the right place to put the menorah, if we would put a menorah in this house, let's say in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, we would put it outside at the front entrance. It has to be by the door, the closest to the street. We hardly find mitzvahs that are done in the street. Mitzvahs are either done in the house or they're done in the shul. And this is an exception, that we do a mitzvah dafka in the street. It's supposed to be outside in the street. And I think they do that in Israel today, they do that as well. And you put something to cover it. Today we have this the possibility to put something on top that the wind doesn't extinguish it. How they did it in those days, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, they lit it outside of the street. And we don't find mitzvahs that are done in the street. It doesn't seem to be the appropriate place to perform a mitzvah. A mitzvah should be inside the house. And also, we learned something very different than other mitzvahs, and that is that it says the right way to do the mitzvah is just like one candle for the whole family. But mahadrin, if you want to go out of your way and do it in an extraordinary way, then every member of the family should have one candle. And if you want to do it in an extraordinary way, then every person who lights a menorah actually lights another candle, additional candle every single night. It's called mahadrin mina mahadrin. And this too is something very unusual. You don't find this by other mitzvahs. And you don't find, if you do find it, it's certain selected individuals that are on a very high level, they do things in this extraordinary way. By Chanukah, this became the normal practice of every person. Every person that lights Chanukah candles today lights it in a way which halachically is considered mahadrin mina mahadrin. Why is Chanukah different in that way? So the answer to all these questions, you have to stay tuned and come in tomorrow. And Mr. Hashem will start giving the answers. Okay. You're welcome.
Yeah. Just have a little.